Welcome to Rights and Remedies, the podcast where we explore the law, the fight for justice, and healing. I'm Allison Mahoney, your host and a lawyer dedicated to fighting for the rights of survivors of domestic and sexual abuse, as well as children harmed by the child welfare system. Each week, we delve into legal battles and court cases, share powerful stories that demand change, and spotlight the cutting-edge practices that are helping victims on their journey to healing. So, if you're ready to dive into the intersection of advocacy and healing, subscribe to Rights and Remedies today. New episodes are released weekly, and we can't wait to have you join the conversation. Together, we can make a difference. Welcome back to Rights and Remedies. Before we begin today's episode, please be advised that we will be discussing sensitive topics, including sexual assault. This may be triggering for some listeners. If you need to take a break or skip this episode, please do so and prioritize your own well-being. And I'm very excited to announce today's guest. We have Cheyenne Wilson. She is the founder of We Are the Evidence, which is such an incredible and powerful name for an organization. Cheyenne is on a mission to raise awareness about the reality of sexual assault, eliminate the stigma associated with being a victim of sexual assault, and she's looking to reform how these cases are handled. Welcome, Cheyenne. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I've been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise, same. So I think just to start, can you give us a bit of your background? I know that you have a background in social work, which adds another layer to, I guess, to your story. So yeah, share your background for us.
Absolutely. So I worked in social work for a few years at the county level where I worked a lot. I was from a small county, so there's a lot of crossover. So I worked with people who had mental illness, brain injuries, and then developmental disabilities. And specifically, I worked a lot with kids who were working with the county as well. So I know a shared passion of yours is advocating for kids in the foster care system, and that was something I did some of before going to school and getting my nursing degree, where I currently work in a hospital as a bedside nurse.
Okay.
And that's been a really great transition because something I'm passionate about is changing how healthcare providers work with patients in a way that's more trauma informed. And I've been able to do a lot more of that now as a nurse.
That's incredible. And I do have more questions for you about that. I have a
Yeah.
bunch of nurses in my family, actually. I'm
Mhm.
like the alien who passes out at the sight of blood. And so it was a profession I could not go into, but I give you a lot of credit for
Thank you.
being able to do that.
It's funny because I can't see my own blood. Like if you come at me with a needle, I'll pass out, but I can work bedside all
Oh,
day long and it's fine. So,
interesting.
mhm.
Interesting. So, can you share a bit about how you got, well, actually, let me back up. What is We Are the Evidence?
So We Are the Evidence is a social media platform, but also an organization where I try to raise awareness about sexual assault. Particularly right now, I'm doing a lot of work to like work with restorative justice and getting that to be an option more available to sexual assault survivors, and then doing trainings in healthcare settings as well. We Are the Evidence was founded alongside while I was writing the book, We Are the Evidence. And so they go kind of hand in hand. And We Are the Evidence is a book that I wrote while healing from my own sexual assault experience as a result of my court case and how it ended, and me realizing that more resources were needed for survivors so that they can make informed decisions on how they want to move forward in a variety of ways.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm sorry to hear that you went through that. Can you provide a little bit more background into when your assault happened and what it was like in the wake of that when you were looking for resources or any sort of guidance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was assaulted my freshman year of college, which wasn't that long ago, but it's amazing still to see how far we've come in having resources for survivors of sexual assault. But at the time, I was assaulted by someone I knew um, in a dorm room not too far from my own dorm room. And I didn't really know anything about sexual assault. I really bought into a lot of the sexual assault myths that it has to be done by a stranger. You had to fight with everything you have. You have to be screaming, like all these myths you hear and how it's shown on TV. And because it was someone I knew and I bought into those myths, I was really confused about what I'd experienced. And so after the assault, I went looking for clarity on what had happened, and I had to go to a library. I remember going to a library where they had the computers where you would type in keywords and looking up sexual assault, and it brought me to an old, outdated book saying women should dress modestly and how to prevent it by not flirting with men.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and there weren't a lot of online resources that I could find, and certainly nothing comprehensive. And so I didn't tell anyone about my sexual assault for a couple years because of that.
Because you felt like maybe your reaction wasn't the quote unquote right reaction.
Yeah, I remember just thinking, I know him. I know he's not a monster. I know he's not hiding in an alley with a knife ready to attack people. So was it actually rape? Or did I ask for this? Or is this my fault?
Yeah.
And everyone I knew the same myths and bought into those same sexual assault myths. And so it didn't feel safe or like I had the ability to pursue reporting. I really never thought that was an option for me until a couple years later when I came across a document for people in school to become prosecuting attorneys where it talked
Mhm.
about rape myths. And that was the first time I realized that I wasn't alone.
Interesting. And there are a lot of myths out there. I remember when I was a prosecutor having to deal with basically the law and order effect, where
Mhm.
people expect to see like video footage, have DNA evidence, have all of these things, and it's something that you have to overcome in front of a jury because it's just not the reality of the situation many times with sexual assault cases. I imagine that was a lot to carry around by yourself when you were that young. Um, so when you did realize that what had happened was a sexual assault, did you go to the police? And if so, what happened and what was that experience like?
So after finding that initial document, and I just had a lot of questions. I was really angry too. Like I had this validation, but also this anger that I didn't know this information. And I started looking into statutes, and I barely met the window where I could report still. And so after doing a lot more research into sexual assault and if my case was even worth reporting, I did call and make a report. At this time, I had moved to a different state, so I was no longer in the state where the crime happened. And so I called, and then they put me in connection with a detective who touched base with me the next day, and that's when the report process really started.
Okay. And did you find that the legal system was trauma informed? And did you feel taken care of or supported as a victim?
I am incredibly fortunate because I had a team that was really there to work for me and support me, and I had overall a really good experience. I was believed from the get-go. I was validated, and that made a huge difference. I can't say enough positive about the prosecuting attorney who was working the case as well as the detective. But ultimately, our system isn't set up to support survivors. Everyone has a lot going on. Everyone was overworked. And when you report your sexual assault, one of the hardest things is you're giving up that control again. And sexual assault has so much to do with control and not feeling safe. So you don't know what's going on. You just told your experience, one of the most vulnerable things that's ever happened to you, and it's out of your hands. And so to answer your question, yes, I think they did the best that they could, but as our systems are structured right now, I still ultimately felt like it was a re-traumatizing experience.
I'm so sorry. What I'm curious, are there things that you think could have been done differently so that it wasn't re-traumatizing?
I think having a lot more information about what the process would look like, and that might be my personality too. I need to have the information to feel safe.
Hmm.
So having timelines. which again is unrealistic, as you know, because things shift. But I remember gearing up and thinking, okay, the trial's going to start next week, and then getting a call right before saying, never mind, it got pushed back again. And those small things that no one really has control over, but just as the system's set up, it's for the defendant. It's for him or them to have the ability to prepare. As the victim, you don't have those same reassurances. You don't have those same rights where you get that reassurance, you know it's going to happen. So I think having even a handout, or again, part of the reason why I wrote Where the Evidence is a resource to hand to survivors to say, here's some general information that you can expect. Here's some of your questions that can be answered and you can keep referring back to would have helped a lot.
Right, right. And how, just out of curiosity, if you remember, how long did it take from the time that you made the police report to the time that the trial concluded?
Over 2 years, just over 2 years.
Which that doesn't, it's a long time. It doesn't surprise me either that it takes that long because of what you described with all the adjournments and motion practice and everything like that that happens along the way.
Mhm.
So I'd like to talk about your book. First of all, where can listeners find your book? If someone wants to buy it, where do they go?
We Are the Evidence is available wherever you'd like to buy your books. I always like to throw in to try and support local. So contacting your local bookseller, they should be able to get a copy in for you. Otherwise, you can order it from Amazon or wherever you feel safest. And I also recognize that purchasing a book about sexual assault might feel really vulnerable if you're the survivor. So you can buy the ebook version or the Audible version as well.
I love that. Thank you for pointing that out. You know, I wasn't even thinking that when you first were saying where you can buy the book, but that's a really good point. And tell us about what's in the book and the types of people who you interviewed as you were writing the book. I know you had shared a bit about that with me before this podcast, and I was very impressed.
Thank you. So, We Are the Evidence, I really was aiming to create something that was comprehensive and accessible. Because, like I said, that document I found that was written for attorneys, I would not describe that as accessible. It was written with a lot of language I didn't understand and had to look up specific words. So, my goal for We Are the Evidence was to write it in a way that no matter where you're at in your healing journey, or if you're supporting someone who is a sexual assault survivor, you can find the information you need to and benefit in that way and then come back to it later. So the ta table of contents is very detailed and allows you to jump to the topic you're looking for. And it covers everything from definitions, sexual assault myths, what is consent, to how to put together your like healing support team, looking at informal and formal supports, reporting, parts of going to court, and then healing afterwards as well. So with that, I am incredibly fortunate that so many experts in their fields were wanting to contribute. So we have detectives and therapists and prosecuting attorneys, civil attorneys. I have a dietitian who contributed, professors. So really a wide range of individuals, including survivors who share some of their stories, specifically focusing on the healing part of that as well. So I think there's 25 other voices besides my own in the book.
Wow, that's
Mhm.
incredible. And I'm curious, when did you write the book? Was it during the criminal case? Was it afterwards?
I started the concept development leading up to going to court, and then really started working on it a lot more after. And then it came out last June, so the bulk of the writing was done the year leading up to that.
And is the book intended to be, I'm obviously it's intended for survivors, but are you also looking for service providers to have copies of the book to then give as a resource to survivors or anyone else?
Yes, so back to how I said that I feel like a resource would have helped me. I think of like victim advocates or witness advocates who are working with the prosecuting team. Christy was the name of the victim witness I was working with, and she was incredibly patient, especially because I asked a million questions. And part of my vision for this book was something that people in like her situation could hand out and say, here's some information that you can get because they're so busy. Again, I think about how many cases she had, and she told me, and the time I don't remember, but it just blew my mind how many people she was working with and how much support she had to give to everyone. And so, yes, I absolutely wrote the book with service providers in mind, hoping that they could kind of lean on it too and take some of the burden off of them.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And can you talk to me about the healing journey and what that looks like? I imagine it's a little bit different for everyone, but are there any key takeaways in your book or key points that you'd like to highlight?
Something I really try to focus on in the book is that healing is going to look so different for everyone and thinking outside of the box and thinking about what works for you and trying things. And if it doesn't work, trying something different. For example, there's so many different types of therapy. And if one type of therapy isn't working for you, consider a different therapist or a different type of therapy. But a lot of healing happens outside of therapy too. So trying to be curious about yourself and about your own healing journey. So horses and dancing was a huge part of mine. And there's
Mm,
another survivor who talks about how dancing helped her reclaim her body. But another survivor who's actually a dear friend of mine, she wrote about how solo traveling gave her power, so much power back and feeling
mhm.
just that she had control over herself and confidence that she could do it. And so I really try to talk about how broad the healing journey is and making it unique to what works for you.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I like that some of the modalities or ways that people heal are, I mean, it just seems like joyful
Mhm.
activities that people lean into. In terms of the social media portion of your company, what is it? Is it about awareness or what's the goal of We Are the Evidence when it comes to social media?
Really raising awareness. Again, I think back to how social media plays a huge part in our lives now, and Instagram wasn't really taking off while I was going through the early parts of my healing. And again, if I had stumbled across something like We Are the Evidence or some of these other amazing social media platforms out there, how I probably would have reported sooner. I probably would have told my loved ones sooner. I would have gone to therapy sooner. My entire healing journey and reporting got set back a couple years just because I didn't have the information. And that's why I think it's so important to get the information everywhere because I don't want people to have to go digging for it. I want it to be accessible and readily available because people experience trauma and sexual assault in all types of situations and settings. And again, the sooner they can start their healing journey, the better.
Yeah, I agree. And I should have asked you this at the very beginning, but where did you come up with the name, or how did you come up with the name We Are the Evidence?
Ooh, I love that question. So going to court, uh, again, probably like watching too much Law and Order and like SVU, I had a dramatic vision of what it would be like in my head. And what it came down to ultimately was what the defendant said, and then like what I had to say. And the defense attorney was able to lean so much into me being not the perfect victim, quote unquote, because I didn't cry on the stand. I didn't have any physical evidence. Yeah. But I am the evidence. Like we are the evidence. What we're saying is the evidence. My trauma is the evidence there. No, I didn't cry on the stand because everyone responds to trauma differently, and I become very cold appearing and I withdraw a lot. But they tried to bring onto the stand some people who could testify to how the trauma impacted me. And there was a judge who had never tried a sexual or had never, what's the word, like been in charge of a sexual assault case before.
Yeah.
She dismissed all of the witnesses, saying
Oh
that it
my
wasn't
gosh.
appropriate. So no one got to say how the trauma impacted me. And yeah, at the end of the day, like I am the evidence. Like we are the evidence. We should be believed. We should be heard. And then there's the whole thing about how I think in general jury education is really important because all the jury members bought into the
Mhm.
sexual assault myths. The defense attorney was able to just go on and on about these myths and buying into them. And you could tell he had a copy paste thing that he read off of. He didn't even know the defendant's last name correctly. And
Gosh.
yeah, it's just infuriating. Hmm.
You consider judicial training?
No. Is that a whole field?
Well, I mean, you were talking about the experts not being permitted to testify.
Hmm.
And I know I've been following news stories in different states about the need for judicial training around intimate partner violence and sexual assault. And so I was just curious if that was something you had
Oh,
ever considered. If not, maybe worth considering.
yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that.
So I want to pivot because we only have a few minutes left to talk about your advocacy efforts today. You mentioned trauma-informed practices in the healthcare industry and restorative justice. So I'm going to leave it open to you as far as which direction to take this, or which of those you're most excited about.
I'm incredibly excited about both, especially because recently I've been spending a good amount of time in both of those areas. But I think especially healthcare because I catch myself making mistakes all the time at work related to causing unintended harm. Something as small as when you're changing a patient, leaving the door open,
Mm,
and how inappropriate that is. And so I'm incredibly excited about getting to work with nurses and healthcare providers about small things that you can do to decrease the chance that someone experiences that harm and just to be more trauma informed in general. I think about some of the patients I've worked with and how you can tell they've had a lot of trauma in their past and physically they weren't able to cover themselves with blankets. And so while busy, doctors, nurses would come into the room, pull the blankets off to do their exam and not cover them back up. And small things like going in there, just covering them back up, making sure they feel safe and not vulnerable and the difference that can make gets me very excited. So that's probably where my energy is going the most right now.
okay. And for those who don't know what restorative justice is, can you explain what restorative justice is and what you're doing in that space?
Yeah, so restorative justice, it's kind of a growing movement. It's not really taking off a ton in the United States yet for working with sexual assault survivors for a variety of very realistic and valid barriers. But it's taking the justice part for the victim out of the criminal court system and getting to work more within the community. So there's different ways and different methods of doing restorative justice. But like one is the victim talks to the perpetrator along with some community members, and there's a circle where you try to hold space for accountability while also allowing discussion and conversation, but then creating kind of like the plan moving forward for how that person who caused the harm will make up for it. But the reason why I think this is so exciting is after going through my case, looking back, I don't know if I ever would have gotten justice anyways, because we're setting the perpetrator, the person who hurt me, is going to be on the defense automatically. And I think what I really wanted was for us to have a conversation and for there to be that accountability that he did something that hurt me and for us to have healing in that way and in that space.
Mhm.
And so that's why I'm excited about restorative justice. Also, I think in general, it'll give a lot more victims and survivors a true feeling of healing and being able to move on. Again, it's not appropriate for everyone depending on the situation, but for mine, I think it would have brought a lot of healing.
Yeah. And I mean, that makes sense to me. In your interactions with other survivors, have you heard a similar perspective where they just want the perpetrator, or not just want, but one of the
Mhm.
primary goals is for the perpetrator to take some accountability for what they did?
Yeah, I think that's what everyone wants is that accountability piece more than anything. There is that, like the justice being served behind bars, that feels really good too. And depending on the victim and what feels right for them, restorative justice again would not be appropriate. But with mine, I knew that the person who harmed me wasn't a quote unquote monster. He made a horrible, horrible like decision and he impacted my life forever.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of growth could have happened if we could have talked about it. And I mean, ultimately, he ended up not, I don't know, serving any time. He's
Mm.
walking away free. There's no accountability, there's no justice. And at least with having a conversation with some accountability, maybe he could have grown from that. Maybe he could have decided to raise awareness around it himself. There's a lot of what ifs that I'll never know.
Yeah.
But I think that would have made a big difference for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, if you could send one message to survivors of sexual assault, what would it be?
Take the time to inform yourself, do the research. That's the only way to make informed decisions. And even again, looking back at reporting, it's completely okay for you not to want to report. It doesn't make your trauma any less valid. But I would much rather someone be able to make that decision in an informed way than feeling like they can't make that decision or it's not available to them when it might be.
Yeah.
And same thing with like therapy. The more information you have, the more informed your decisions can be. And I think that makes a really big difference and empowers us.
Amazing. And speaking of information, what is your social media handle for We Are the Evidence, and which social media platforms are you on?
I'm most active on Instagram on We Are the Evidence, and then you can find me on Blue Sky as well with We Are the Evidence. That's a newer one. I'm not as familiar with it, so it's like the We Are the Evidence dot blue, whatever the end tag is.
Uh-huh.
But those two are probably the best places to find me.
Okay. And do you have a website?
Yes, wearetheevidence.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Cheyenne. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for sharing your experience and your insights. And I am confident that you're going to help a lot of people. So thank you for all you've done.
Thank you for having me and all the work that you continue to do as well.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening today. We'll have all of the links regarding We Are the Evidence in our show notes and information on how you can connect with them. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Rights and Remedies. I hope today's episode gave you valuable insights into the legal issues facing victims and the pathways to healing. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Whether you're a survivor, an advocate, or someone looking to learn more, we're here to support and empower you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. You can also follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at ALM Law LLC for updates, resources, and more. Until next time, take care and remember that together we can make a difference.